Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening the file on a figure who is, well, he's the heavy artillery in Japanese literature.
Oh, absolutely. A giant.
If you're a fan of Japanese culture or cinema or just really good, really twisted storytelling, you have almost certainly come across his name, or at the very least, the prize named after him.
You must have. It's the single most prestigious literary award in Japan. Winning the Akutagawa Prize is, career-wise, it's like winning the lottery and an Oscar on the same day.
Exactly. We were talking about Ryūnosuke Akutagawa, often called the father of the Japanese short story. And for a lot of people, I think the association starts and ends with Akira Kurosawa's masterpiece film, Rashōmon.
Which is a great entry point, don't get me wrong. It's a phenomenal film.
Of course.
But relying on the movie to understand the man is a little bit of a trap. It helps, but it also, it hinders.
Yeah.
Akutagawa was so much more than just the source material for a classic black and white movie. He was a complex, deeply troubled, and I would say an incredibly modern figure.
That is exactly what we're going to unpack today. We aren't just looking at his bibliography. We're looking at a man who lived a short, very intense life, died at just 35.
So young.
He lived during the Taishō period, which was this fascinating, chaotic era of modernization in Japan right between the wars, and he was absolutely obsessed with structure, with art, with perfection, but underneath all of that intellectual brilliance, he was haunted.
Haunted is exactly the right word. He wasn't just sad or melancholy. He was terrified.
He famously described his state of mind in his final years as being plagued by what was the phrase again?
A vague insecurity.
That's it, a vague insecurity. And that phrase, that feeling, is going to be our North Star for this deep dive.
It really is the key to unlocking his psyche. Our mission today is to understand how a man who was terrified, literally terrified of inheriting madness, used literature to try and build this kind of fortress of logic and structure around himself.
Right, to keep the chaos out.
He was trying to make sense of a chaotic world and a chaotic inner world through his pen. And the tragedy is, at the end of the day, the pen might not have been strong enough.
So we've got a mountain of sources here. We've got the biographical data, critical analyses of his major works, details on his relationships, his travel diaries, and of course the tragic accounts of the end of his life. We are going to sift through all of it to see what made Akutagawa tick.
And to do that, we have to start at the very beginning. Because for Akutagawa, his origin story isn't just, background noise.
No.
It is the source of the trauma that defined him.
Okay, let's rewind. March 1st, 1892. We're in the Kishibashi district of Tokyo. And here's the first thing that surprised me, and I honestly had to double-check this in the notes. His name wasn't originally Akutagawa.
No, it wasn't. He was born Ryūnosuke Niihara. He was the eldest son of a businessman named Toshizu Niihara.
And what did the family do? Because when I think of 1892 Japan, I'm thinking, I don't know, tea, silk, maybe pottery. I am not thinking of this.
They owned a milk production business.
A milk business? Yeah.
In 1892. Get out of here.
It sounds bizarre now, but you have to remember the context. This is the Meiji era. Japan is modernizing at breakneck speed. Western influence is just pouring in.
Okay, so milk was a Western thing.
Exactly. Milk was seen as this exotic Western health tonic. It was a brand new industry. So being in the milk business meant his father was an entrepreneur, a hustler, someone who was riding that wave of modernization.
See, this is what I love. You picture this high-minded literary genius, this master of the macabre and the historical, and he starts out in a milk family. It really grounds him in the reality of Meiji-era Tokyo. It's gritty, it's commercial.
It does. But that reality is shattered very, very quickly. And this is the crucial moment in his early life. Shortly after Ryūnosuke was born, we're talking maybe 7 or 8 months in, his mother, Fuku, experienced a severe mental illness.
The sources just say mental illness, which is a very broad term. But in the context of the time and how it affected him, this was obviously significant, right? This wasn't just a bout of postpartum depression.
Yeah.
No, this was catastrophic for the family structure. The records are a bit murky on the exact diagnosis, as they often were in the 19th century, but she became incapacitated. She essentially lost her mind.
Wow.
And because of her condition, she just couldn't care for him. So the infant Ryūnosuke was removed from that house, the milk house, and was adopted and raised by his maternal uncle, Mikiaki Akutagawa.
And that's how he gets the surname.
That's how he gets the name we know him by today.
So he's removed from his biological father and mother, and he's placed into the Akutagawa household. What was that environment like? What was it similar to the milk business? More entrepreneurs?
Not at all. It was night and day. And this is a major shift in his trajectory. The Akutagawa lineage was very, very different. They were part of the warrior class, the samurai class, although by this time the class system had been legally abolished.
But the culture would still be there.
The culture, the mindset, absolutely. Historically, they had served the Tokugawa clan as okuju.
Okubzu. Okay, I need you to unpack that term for me. I looked it up and I saw translations like tea server, which sounds a little, well, it sounds like a waiter.
Chuckles. It's a bit more prestigious than a waiter at a diner.
I would hope so.
Think of it more like the master of ceremonies for the shogun's private quarters. Essentially, they were the officials who managed the tea rooms and served tea within the shogun's castle.
Ah, so it's a high culture role.
Exactly. It sounds like a service role, and it was. But it was a role of incredible culture, ritual, and precision. You had to be incredibly disciplined, educated in aesthetics, and deeply cultured to hold that position.
So he goes from a merchant background hustling milk to a household that is steeped in tea ceremonies, art, and the remnants of that old samurai discipline.
Precisely. The Akutagawa family loved art and literature. It was in their blood. So young Ryūnosuke was immersed in this environment. He started reading classical Chinese literature from a very young age. He was reading the heavy hitters of his own time, Morikai, Natsume Tsuchiki. He was just breathing in high culture. He was a prodigy, frankly.
But, and there is always a but with him, we have to talk about the shadow hanging over all this. He knew about his biological mother, right? It wasn't some kind of family secret.
Oh, he knew. And this is the psychological burden he carried every single day of his life. He spent his entire life terrified, just petrified, that he would inherit his mother's madness.
That is such a heavy weight for a kid to carry, just constantly thinking, is today the day I lose my mind? Is it in my blood?
It shaped his entire worldview.
Yeah.
Critical analysis suggests that for Akutagawa, the equation was very simple.
Yeah.
If he went mad, life would become meaningless. He equated rationality and intellect with existence itself.
So his mind was everything.
Everything. So his drive to create these perfect structured stories wasn't just artistic ambition, it was a defense mechanism. He was trying to prove to himself over and over and over again that his mind was sound.
It's like he was building a wall against the chaos using words. If he could structure a sentence perfectly, then his mind must be working perfectly.
Precisely. The structure of the story was the structure of his sanity.
Let's look at his education then, because he was clearly a brilliant kid. You don't read classical Chinese poetry at age 10 if you're, slacking off.
He was incredibly smart.
Yeah.
In 1910, he entered the first higher school. Now, for listeners who might not know the Japanese education system of the time, the first higher school was the elite of the elite. It was the main feeder school for the Imperial University.
The Ivy League of its day.
Basically, you have to take these grueling entrance exams to get in.
And Akutagawa.
He got in without taking them. His middle school academic record was just that good. He was exempted.
That is the ultimate teacher's pet flex, isn't it? Oh, the test. I'll just skip it, thanks.
It just shows his intellectual capacity. And it was there, at the first higher school, that he met the people who would define his generation. He formed friendships with Kan Kikuchi, Masao Kume, Yuzi Yamamoto, and Tsuchiya Bunmei.
And for those listening who might not be deep into Japanese literary history, this isn't just a random group of college buddies.
Oh, no.
This is like a literary all-star team in the making. A powerhouse.
It absolutely is. These men would go on to shape the entire Taishō and Showa literary landscapes. Kan Kikuchi, in particular, plays a massive role in Akutagawa's legacy later on. He's the promoter, the organizer, the guy who gets things done. But at this stage, they are just young, brilliant, ambitious students.
And then in 1913, Akutagawa heads to Tokyo Imperial University, what we now call the University of Tokyo, to study English literature. And this is where things start to get real. He's not just reading anymore, he's starting to write.
He is. And he's doing it with that same group of friends. In 1914, they decided to revive a literary journal called Shinshichu.
Which translates to what?
New Currents of Thought.
New Currents of Thought. That sounds very ambitious. What was their vibe? What were they trying to say?
Well, just look at what they were publishing. They weren't just writing about their own lives or, local gossip. They were publishing translations of William Butler Yeats and Anatole France right alongside their own original writing.
So they were looking outward. They were bringing the world to Japan in a literary sense.
Yes, and this is a crucial point about Akutagawa. He believed that literature should be universal. He wanted to bridge that gap between Western culture and Japanese culture. He didn't see them as incompatible. He saw them as two halves of a whole. He wanted to take the modernism of the West and fuse it with the tradition of the East.
So he's translating Yeats, he's studying English lit, and he's starting to pen his own stories. And this leads us to 1915 and the debut of a story that is now legendary, Rashōmon.
He published Rashōmon while he was still a student. It appeared in a magazine called Teikoku Bungaku, or Imperial Literature.
Now, Rashōmon is a heavy story. It's set in this dilapidated gate in Kyoto, filled with corpses, with a servant debating whether to become a thief just to survive. It's grim, it's atmospheric.
It is dark, atmospheric, and psychologically complex. And it's based on a 12th century tale from a collection called the Konjaku Monogatari.
So he's taking old material and making it new.
Right. Akutagawa took this old piece of folklore, which was honestly kind of dry, and he injected it with this modern psychological realism. He made us care about why the servant makes his choice, what goes on in his head.
So surely his friends, this literary power team, they read it and said, Ryūnosuke, you're a genius. This is the future of literature.
You would think so. But actually, they criticized it.
What?
It was not well received by his inner circle. They didn't really get it immediately. It wasn't an overnight sensation.
That has to be tough. You put your soul into this dark, moody piece, and your best friends are like, I don't know about this one. It's a bit weird.
It was discouraging, for sure. They thought it was too constructed, maybe a bit too artificial compared to the popular style of the time. But Akutagawa had guts. In December 1915, just a month or so later, he gathered up his courage and went to a literary circle meeting hosted by his idol, the great Natsume Soseki.
Okay, we need to pause on Soseki. For the listener, who is Natsume Soseki in the context of 1915 Japan? Because I feel like famous writer doesn't quite cover it.
Famous writer is a massive understatement. He is the sun around which the entire literary world orbits. He's the author of I Am a Cat, Bachin, Kokoro. He's the most respected, most influential intellectual in the country. To get his approval was everything. It was like getting a nod from the emperor of literature.
So Akutagawa, still just a student, walks into the lion's den.
He starts attending these weekly meetings known as the Thursday Club, and in early 1916 he publishes another story called The Nose Hana.
The nose. I love this story. It's about a high-ranking Buddhist priest with a ridiculously long, dangling nose who's obsessed with shrinking it because he's so vain. It's hilarious, but also kind of sad.
It's a brilliant satire on vanity and obsession, and Shigeki read it.
And he didn't just read it. He wrote Akutagawa a letter of praise.
That's the golden ticket. That's everything. Shiteki basically said, this is excellent. If you can write 20 or 30 more stories like this, you will be a unique presence in the literary world. That stamp of approval changed everything. It secured Akutagawa's fame. He wasn't just a student anymore. He was Soseki's anointed successor, in a way.
And this brings us to his style. We mentioned earlier that he was translating Yeats and France, but The Nose and Rashōmon are set in the distant past. Why was he looking backward to move forward? Why not just write about 1916 Tokyo?
This is where we get into the literary battleground of the time. The dominant trend in Japan then was something called naturalism.
Naturalism. Define that for us. Because in my head, that sounds like writing about trees and rivers, but I know that's not it.
No, not nature like trees. Naturalism was about portraying life exactly as it is. Often gritty, often focused on the mundane, the ugly, the everyday.
But unvarnished truth.
Right. It was supposed to be real. And it was often very autobiographical, the I-novel or shishetsu genre, where the author just writes about their own life. I woke up, I felt sad, I looked at a wall.
And Akutagawa hated that.
He was not a fan. He was an anti-naturalist. He didn't want to just document the boring details of his daily life. He thought art required artifice, structure. He wanted to use historical settings, the Heian period, the Edo period, the early Meiji period, as a stage.
Why, though? What did that give him?
By distancing the story from the now, he could explore universal psychological truths without getting bogged down in the specific social issues of 1916 or, his own laundry list of problems.
So he uses the past as a mirror for the modern mind. It's safer, in a way. You can talk about corruption or vanity more freely if you dress it up in a kimono from 500 years ago.
Exactly. He reinterpreted these classical works with modern sensibilities. He wasn't just retelling old myths, he was rewriting them to expose the modern anxieties underneath. Works like Gasaku Zanmai, Absorbed in Letters, and Jigoku Hen, Hell Screen, are perfect examples of this.
Hell Screen is another massive one. That's the one about the painter, right? The obsessive painter.
Yeah, Yoshihide. The greatest painter in the land, but a man with a very twisted personality. He is ordered by a powerful lord to paint a screen depicting Buddhist hell. But Yoshihide has a problem. He can only paint what he sees. He's a supreme realist in his own way.
So he can't just imagine hell, he needs a reference model.
Right, so he starts torturing his apprentices, he unleashes snakes on them, he chains them up just to see their faces contort in fear so he can paint it.
Talk about a toxic workplace environment.
It gets so much worse. The climax involves a carriage. He asks the Lord to burn a carriage so he can paint the flames of hell. The Lord agrees, but in a really cruel twist, he puts Yoshihide's own daughter inside the burning carriage.
No. And Yoshihide watches.
He watches. At first, he is horrified. But then, as the flames rise and his daughter dies, his expression changes to one of ecstasy. He's captivated by the beauty of the flames, the color of the burning. He sacrifices his humanity for his art.
That's deeply disturbing stuff. But it's also about that obsession with art, right? The idea that art is more important than life itself.
Or that art requires a sacrifice of humanity, which, given Akutagawa's own obsession with his craft, feels like a very personal exploration. Was he afraid that he was becoming Yoshihide? Was he sacrificing his own life, his own sanity, to create these perfect stories?
I want to pivot to the themes in his work, because you mentioned Hellscreen and the sacrifice. But there is another recurring theme that the sources highlight, and it's a bit controversial, the role of women.
This is a critical part of understanding Akutagawa. And to understand his female characters, we have to look at the women who raised him. We have the three mothers, essentially.
Fuku, the biological mother.
Who represents the fear of madness. She is the source of his existential dread. Even though he was removed from her care at 8 months old, she loomed large in his imagination. She was the ghost in the machine.
Then there's the aunt who raised him, Fuki.
Yes, Fuki. She played the most prominent role in his day-to-day life. And the sources describe her as controlling. She was unmarried, and she poured all her energy and attention into Ryūnosuke. She demanded a lot from him, especially as she got older. She was a dominating force in his domestic life.
So you have a distant, terrifying mother figure and a present, controlling mother figure. How does that translate to the page?
Not well, to be honest. The women in Akutagawa's stories are often portrayed as dominating, aggressive, deceitful, or selfish. There's a definite streak of, well, misogyny in his work that we can't ignore.
That is a harsh assessment, but the text backs it up.
It does. But if you look closely, the men are often the victims of these women. It's a reflection of his own feelings of being trapped or controlled. It's not necessarily a fair reflection of reality, but it is a very accurate reflection of his internal landscape. He felt suffocated by the expectations and the emotional demands of the women in his life.
It's fascinating how his personal life just bleeds into the ink like that.
Yeah.
Speaking of bleeding, let's talk about a fight, a literary fight. The dispute with Junichi Tanizaki.
Oh, this was the heavyweight title match of Taishō's literature. Tanizaki versus Akutagawa.
Tanizaki, for listeners, is another giant. He wrote The Makioka Sisters, In Praise of Shadows. Very different style.
Very, very different.
Yeah.
Tanizaki was all about aesthetics, shadows, sensuality. Akutagawa was about intellect, irony, structure. And their debate was public. It was essentially a debate about the soul of the novel. The core argument was structure versus lyricism.
Okay, break that down. Who was on which side?
Akutagawa was team structure. He argued that the structure of the story, how it is built, the architecture of the plot, was more important than the content or the plot itself. He wanted a story to be a finely crafted object. He famously said that a story without a proper structure is not art.
Which makes perfect sense for a guy trying to keep chaos at bay. He wants a blueprint. He needs it.
Exactly. Tanizaki took the opposite view. He argued for lyricism. He thought the most important thing was the flow, the emotion, the beauty of the prose, even if the plot was a bit loose. He argued that a story could be interesting purely based on its atmosphere. He thought structure was mechanical and artificial.
So Akutagawa wants a blueprint, and Tanizaki wants a vibe.
That's a good way to put it. And again, this aligns perfectly with Akutagawa's psychology. A mind trying to order a chaotic world will always cling to structure. If the structure fails, the story fails. And for Akutagawa, if the structure fails, the mind fails. He needed that control. Tanizaki, who was perhaps a bit more psychologically robust, was comfortable letting things flow.
It's high stakes for him. Now, we can't talk about structure without talking about the story that messes with structure the most, the story that gave us the term the Rashōmon effect. We're talking about In a Grove or Yabu no Naka.
This is arguably his masterpiece of structural experimentation. It was published in 1922.
And just to clarify for everyone, because this is the most common misconception, Kurosawa's movie Rashōmon is actually based on this story, In a Grove.
Correct. The movie takes the title and the framing device, the gate, the rain, the conversation, from Akutagawa's story Rashōmon.
Hmm.
But the actual plot, the murder mystery, the trial, the conflicting testimonies, that comes entirely from In a Grove.
So what happens in a grove? Why is it so revolutionary?
Well, the premise is simple. A samurai has been murdered. His body is found in a bamboo grove. And we get a series of testimonies given to a police commissioner. We hear from a woodcutter who found the body, a monk who saw him earlier, the police agent who caught the bandit.
Okay, standard police procedural stuff so far.
Right. But then we hear from the bandit himself, Taijūmaru. And he admits to killing the samurai. He says it was a glorious duel. He tied up the samurai, seduced the wife in front of him, and then fought the samurai fairly and won.
Case closed. He confessed.
Not so fast. Next, we hear from the samurai's wife. And she says she killed him. She says that after the bandit raped her and left, her husband looked at her with such coldness and loathing that she couldn't bear it. She killed him to save her honor and then tried to kill herself but failed.
Okay, that's a problem. Two killers confessing.
And then finally, through a medium, we hear from the ghost of the dead samurai himself. And he says he committed suicide.
Not kidding.
Not at all. He says his wife agreed to go with the bandit and asked the bandit to kill him. The bandit was so shocked by her cruelty that he let the samurai choose his own fate. The samurai, heartbroken, took his own life.
And here's the kicker. There is no detective. There is no Sherlock Holmes who walks in at the end and says, "Elementary, my dear Watson, the bandit is lying because of the mud on his boots."
That is the genius of it. Akutagawa leaves it completely unresolved. There is no solution.
Why? What was he trying to do with that?
He was challenging the very concept of objective truth. He was showing that truth is relative to the observer. Everyone is the hero, or at least the tragic victim, of their own narrative. They're all lying, or perhaps they're all telling their own version of the truth, but the objective reality is lost forever in the grove.
It's so modern. I mean, scroll through social media today and you see In a Grove playing out every single minute. Two people describe the same video and see completely different things.
It is timeless.
Yeah.
And it became a standard trope in storytelling because of him. But for Akutagawa, I think it also reflects that vague insecurity again. If you can't even trust the truth of a simple event, what can you trust? If reality itself is subjective, then how can you possibly find solid ground?
That is a chilling thought. It's not just a clever puzzle, it's an existential crisis in story form. Now, In a Grove was published in 1922. This is right after a major event in his life that seems to mark the beginning of the end, the trip to China.
The China trip of 1921, yes.
Yeah.
He was sent as a reporter for the Osaka Mainichi Shinbun.
A reporter gig. Traveling to Nanjing, Shanghai, Hangzhou. That sounds like a great adventure.
It was supposed to be. Akutagawa had romanticized China his entire life.
Yeah.
Remember, he grew up reading classical Chinese literature. He had this vision of China as a land of poets and sages, of Li Bai and Du Fu. In fact, before he even left, he wrote a story called The Christ of Nanjing, based purely on his imagination and those old books.
So he arrives in 1921 China with this fantasy in his head. What does he find?
Reality. And reality was harsh. China in 1921 was in turmoil. It was the warlord era. It was chaotic, dirty, politically unstable. The glorious ancient culture he loved was either crumbling or hidden behind a thick layer of poverty and corruption.
It must have been a massive shock to the system, the ultimate expectation versus reality.
It broke him physically and mentally. The trip was incredibly stressful. He suffered from various illnesses while he was traveling, pleurisy, insomnia, severe digestive issues. He was hospitalized in Shanghai.
And the sources say he never really recovered from that, right?
No. His health took a permanent nosedive. He returned to Japan exhausted, disillusioned, and physically weak. This really marks the shift toward his final, darker years. The vibrant historical storyteller starts to fade, and a darker, more introspective writer begins to emerge.
Let's walk through that descent into darkness. Because his writing changes, doesn't it? He moves away from those polished historical tales like Rashōmon.
He does. In his late career, the great anti-naturalist starts doing something very interesting. He starts writing about himself. But it's not the boring daily life naturalism he hated. It's a documentation of his own mental deterioration.
He starts mining his own diaries for horror stories.
Exactly. Works like Daiduji Shinsuke no Hansei,
Yeah.
Early Life of Daiduji Shinsuke, and Tenkibo, Death Register. Death Register is particularly poignant. It's a stark account of the deaths in his family. He's confronting the mortality and the madness head on. He's looking at his family tree and seeing a graveyard.
And the madness was becoming more than just a fear at this point. It was becoming a symptom. He wasn't just afraid of going crazy. He was starting to see things.
Yes. He started experiencing visual hallucinations. He saw doppelgangers. He reported seeing himself walking down the street. He saw insects that weren't there. The anxiety over inheriting his mother's illness hit a fever pitch. He was convinced the curse had finally activated.
There's a story from this period called spinning gears or cogwheels, Haguruma.
Spinning gears is one of the most terrifying things he ever wrote because it feels so real. It's fragmented, it's disjointed. In the story, the protagonist is plagued by these translucent spinning cogwheels that are constantly blocking his vision.
Which is actually a symptom of migraines, isn't it? A visual aura.
It is a scotoma.
Yeah.
But for Akutagawa, these spinning gears were a sign that his machine was breaking down. He interpreted a physical symptom as a sign of mental collapse. The story is paranoid, full of ominous coincidences. He sees the color yellow and thinks it's a sign of betrayal. He hears a raincoat rustle and thinks it's a ghost. It's the sensation of losing your mind put onto paper.
And he also wrote Kappa in 1927. Now, Kappa sounds like it should be fun. Kappas are those little green water imps from folklore. They eat cucumbers. They're kind of cute.
You'd think so.
Uh-huh.
But Akutagawa's Kappa is a biting, deeply cynical satire. A psychiatric patient tells the story of how he fell into the land of the Kappas. But the Kappa society is just a twisted mirror of Japanese society. They have absurd laws, they debate suicide, they talk about capitalism and art.
There is a part in Kappa where a baby Kappa is about to be born, and the father asks the baby, "Do you want to be born?" And the baby says, "No, it looks awful out there," and decides not to be born.
It's incredibly dark humor. It's basically Gulliver's Travels, but much, much darker. It shows that Akutagawa was looking at the world, the legal system, the family structure, capitalism, and just seeing the absurdity and the pain of it all. He was losing the will to participate in the game of life.
This brings us to 1927, the year everything ends.
He actually survived a suicide attempt earlier in 1927. It involved a friend of his wife. It was a messy situation, a double suicide pact that didn't go through, but it signaled that he was ready to go. He was planning it.
And then on July 24th, 1927.
July 24th. It was the rainy season. Hot, humid, oppressive. Akutagawa was in his home in Tabata. He took an overdose of veronal-barbital.
Where did he get it?
It was given to him by a doctor and poet named Mokichi Saito. Akutagawa had been using sleeping pills for his insomnia for a long time, so he had access. But this was a calculated lethal dose. He read the Bible, he read some scripture, and he went to sleep.
He was only 35 years old.
35. This is just incredibly young. He left a wife and 3 children. One of his sons, Yasushi Akutagawa, actually went on to become a famous composer, so the artistic gene survived.
But he left something else behind, too. A note. And this note has become almost as famous as his stories. It's one of the most famous suicide notes in history.
The suicide note was addressed to his old friend from high school, Masao Kume. And in it, he tries to explain why. He says he doesn't have a specific grievance. It's not about money or a scandal or a debt.
So what does he say it is?
He uses the phrase bonyari shitafuan,
A vague insecurity.
a vague insecurity about the future.
That phrase chills me every single time I hear it. Bonyari shitafuan. It's not a sharp panic. It's not I'm afraid of the police or I'm in debt. It's just this fog of dread.
It encapsulates the modern condition so perfectly. It's not the fear of a tiger eating you. It's the fear of existence itself, the fear of the unknown, the fear that nothing really matters. Akutagawa, standing on the edge of the modern era, looking at the industrialization, the changing culture, the political instability, he just felt this overwhelming, undefined anxiety. He felt like the ground was dissolving beneath his feet.
And he couldn't structure his way out of it anymore. The fortress he built had failed.
The walls he built with his stories finally crumbled. The logic just couldn't hold back the vague insecurity.
The immediate aftermath of his death must have sent shockwaves through the literary world.
It was huge. It was seen as the end of an era. The Taishō democracy was ending. The militarism of the Shushu era was on the rise. Akutagawa's death felt like a curtain closing on a certain kind of intellectual life.
I read that one of his disciples was really affected.
Yes, Katsuo Hori. He wrote a story called The Holy Family in 1930 that was deeply influenced by Akutagawa's death. Referencing him as a deceased mentor character, it shows the impact he had on the younger generation.
And then his old friend, the one he met in school, Kan Kikuchi, decided to ensure that Akutagawa's name would never, ever be forgotten.
Kan Kikuchi was a doer. He was the organizer. And in 1935, 8 years after the suicide, he established the Akutagawa Prize in memory of his friend.
And today that is the prize.
It is given to promising new writers. If you win the Akutagawa Prize in Japan, your career is made. It's a beautiful tribute, using his name to launch the next generation of storytellers. It ensures that his name is spoken with reverence every single year.
And his stories are still being adapted. We have the Kurosawa film, obviously. But The sources mention ballet, opera.
Yes, the complexity of his work lends itself to other forms. There's a ballet by Victoria Peleva called Gagaku, based on Hellscreen, an opera by Mayako Kubo called Rashōmon. His work is just so visually and psychologically rich.
And even recently, in 2020, NHK produced a film called A Stranger in Shanghai about his time as a reporter in China.
Starring Rie Matsuda. It shows that we are still fascinated by that pivotal moment where his world started to crack. We want to understand why he broke.
So let's try to synthesize all of this. We have a boy from a milk business who becomes a samurai of literature. He masters the art of the short story. He battles the ghost of his mother's madness his whole life. He creates these masterpieces like Rashomon and In a Grove. And he dies of a vague insecurity. What is the final takeaway here?
I think the takeaway is about the fragility of order. Akutagawa was a genius of structure. He could take a messy, chaotic event and turn it into a perfect, jewel-like story. He tried to impose order on the world through his art. He thought if he could just write the perfect sentence, he could save himself.
But the world is messy, and the mind is messy.
Exactly. The tragedy is that he tried to structure the world, but he couldn't structure his own peace of mind. He was fighting a battle against his own biology and his own sensitivity that, in the end, he just couldn't win. But in fighting that battle, he left us some of those profound investigations into truth and human nature that had ever been written. He looked into the abyss, and he took notes for us.
It's a haunting reminder that sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the deepest pain.
Absolutely.
And I want to leave the listener with this thought. We live in a world now that is arguably more chaotic than 1927 ever was. We have information overload, deep fakes, conflicting narratives on the news every single day. In a Grove is basically our daily reality. We never know who is telling the truth.
That's very true. The relativity of truth is our new normal.
So when Akutagawa talked about a vague insecurity about the future, I wonder, does that resonate more with us now than it did even back then? Are we all feeling a little bit of that Bonyari Shitafuan?
That is a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
I think we are all looking for a structure to hold on to in one way or another.
If you haven't read In a Grove, or if you haven't watched Kurosawa's Rashomon in a while, do it this week. But do it with this context in mind. Think about the man writing it, trying to find the truth in a world that wouldn't give him any.
It changes the experience completely.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you on the next one.